All right, it's 5:35 Eastern Time. So welcome everyone to our Friday night reading series. This series is hosted by the MFA in Writing and Publishing program here at the Vermont College of Fine Arts. We're the only residential program on campus, and we've just had such a strong roster of writers, editors, agents who've been part of this series, and faculty, and also alumnus, and we're just very proud of and honored by our community. And I'm thankful for all of the wonderful writers that we have today: Sean Prentiss, Lesley Arimah, Douglas Kearney, and one of my heroes, Roxanne Dunbar-Ortiz. I'm so honored to have you all read with us tonight. And just in terms of some ground rules and how the programming will work for this evening, I would ask, if you are not presenting on Zoom, that you keep yourself on mute. This session is being recorded, so please do keep yourself on mute until the Q&A portion of the evening. And if you don't want your video to be recorded at any time, you're welcome to mute your video as well, though we will be kind of capturing this on speaker mode. So whoever's speaking at the mic will be recorded, and rather than the audience. Something to keep in mind. So our readers will be introduced by our wonderful new program assistant, Sarah Limi. And I wanted to say a couple words about Sarah. So this is just straight from her bio. So Sarah is the author of the award-winning books When No One's Looking, Lucky Shot, and Lucky Find, as well as Van Life, a travelogue from exploring the Northwest with 2 dogs and a cat named Stephen. Her shorter work has been published in the Los Angeles Review, Hunger Mountain, Santa Fe Writers Project, and others. She's also a PhD research student at the University of Birmingham in England, and is writing on ambiguity in search of androgynous narratives. She's also an alum of our MFA in Writing and Publishing program and the low-residency MFA in Writing program. So we're excited to have Sarah as our program assistant. Sarah, if you want to say a couple words, and I'll turn over the programming to you at this point. So welcome, Sarah.
Thank you very much, Rita. That took me by surprise. I wasn't expecting that. So thank you to VCFA to bring me on board on this side. It's really nice. It's nice to see Sean and different people, and Erin that I've worked with before as a student. So that aside, I'm very honored to be here. Thank you all for coming. Thank you, readers, for coming and joining us and being part of this. It's what keeps the program and that sense of community alive, especially right now. We really need it. So I really appreciate it. I'd like to introduce first off Roxanne. Roxanne Dunbar-Ortiz is Professor Emerita at California State University and the author of 13 books, including Roots of Resistance, A History of Land Tenure in New Mexico, An Indigenous People's History of the United States, Loaded, A Disarming History of the Second Amendment, and Not a Nation of Immigrants, Settler Colonialism, White Supremacy, and a History of Exclusion and Erasure. So warm welcome, and thank you very much for joining us, Roxanne.
Thank you, Sarah, and thank you, Rita. And it's good to be here with all of you. I'm going to read a brief reading from my 2018 book. It's already a little dated, maybe, but I think it's still relevant. It's called Loaded, A Disarming History of the Second Amendment. I am a historian as well as being a writer. And I'm going to read from the chapter, just a portion of the chapter on white nationalism. So I wrote this book in 2016 and 2017, just as Trump was campaigning and then won the presidency and took office. And I do want to apologize in advance that I won't be able to stay for the rest of the program due to overscheduling. On Wednesday evening, June 17, 2015, perhaps the most symbolically, historically event took place, specifically targeted and racially motivated. So these regular US mass shootings This one was unique. It took place in Charleston, South Carolina, the site of the slaughter of 9 people, being a church. For evangelical Protestant congregations in the United States, Wednesday evening is prayer meeting and Bible reading in gatherings of the most dedicatedly faithful. But this was a very specific Protestant church that was targeted, the Emmanuel African Methodist Episcopal, or AME, Church of Charleston. Mother Emanuel, the oldest historically Black church in North America, also a historical site of slave resistance, being the church co-founded by Denmark-Vesey. Denmark-Vesey was born into slavery in 1767, but at age 32 in 1799, he won a lottery and purchased his freedom. He never was able to raise enough money to purchase the freedom of his wife and 2 sons. Vesey was literate and a skilled carpenter who operated his own business. In 1818, he co-founded Emmanuel AME Church, which quickly attracted nearly 1,000 members. Vesey was free and respected by his white clients and white fellow clergymen. But Vesey also continued to identify and socialize with those who remained in bondage, including his own family. In 1819, as Congress debated whether slavery would be permitted in the new state of Missouri, Vesey may have hoped that the end of legalized slavery was on the horizon, but the decision went the other way, and the 1820 Missouri Constitution allowed white settlers to buy, sell, and own enslaved Africans. It is not known if this disappointment led Vesey to organize a revolt, or more likely it had been longer in the planning. The Haitian Revolution, 1791 to 1804, carried out by enslaved Africans, ended in national independence and the abolition of slavery, which struck fear in US American slavers and inspiration in Black people, free and enslaved throughout the hemisphere. Over a period of time, Vesey secretly organized enslaved and free Africans, borrowing from the Haitian Revolution strategy. He had actually gone to sea for a while and did visit independent Haiti. At the time of the planned revolt, 25,000 people lived in Charleston, only 11,000 of whom were white. Before the date set for the uprising, June 16, 1822, slavers learned about the plan and immediately mobilized all the armed white citizens, arresting Vesey and dozens of others. Vesey and 5 enslaved Africans were hanged on July 2nd, 1822. One of Vesey's still enslaved sons was arrested and deported to the Caribbean. His other enslaved son, Robert, survived to be emancipated during the Civil War and helped rebuild the war-damaged AME church his father had co-founded. Later, explaining that he sought to ignite a race war by his vile deed, 21-year-old Dylan Roof, who is white, arrived at the Wednesday prayer meeting and was welcomed by the 12 African-American attendees, including the nationally and internationally known and respected AME senior pastor, who was also a South Carolina state senator, Clementa C. Pinckney. After an hour of Bible study, Roof pulled out a Glock 41 and a .45 caliber pistol, a pistol in each hand, both loaded with hollow point bullets, reloading 5 times, killing all but 3 people present. He may have been expecting a larger attendance, as he was carrying 8 magazines filled with bullets. Roof fled the bloody scene and was later apprehended and arrested. The date Roof had chosen to hatch his plan was obviously premeditated. It was the 193rd anniversary of the Vesey-led revolt. Images circulated on social media quickly that made clear that Roof was a white nationalist. First, there was his manifesto loaded with slurs on African Americans, Jews, Latinos, and Asians that claimed he had become racially aware following the shooting of Trayvon Martin in 2012. He said that while searching the web to learn about the case, he concluded that the killer, George Zimmerman, was right. What convinced him was the information he came upon at white nationalist websites and chat rooms. One picture on Roof's website showed him wearing a jacket with 2 white nationalist symbols sewed into the fabric: the flag of the former apartheid South African state and the flag of the former white Rhodesian Republic, before it was overthrown by the Zimbabwe Liberation Movement in 1980. Roof even had a website registered under his name that he called The Last Rhodesian. What stood out for most of those who had never even heard of Rhodesia was the picture of him posing with a pistol and a Confederate battle flag. The widespread attention given to Roof's Confederate affinity and espousal for white nationalism, which he had made no secret about, together with the growing presence of white nationalists during the following months as Donald J. Trump's stadium rallies, thrust the topic of white supremacy out in the open nationwide. Such exposure drove home the fact that most of those who propagate white nationalism were not mentally ill, but rather ideologically driven, and way beyond the Confederate battle flag, the lost cause, or limited to the South, although those tropes remained integral to the anti-Black and anti-Mexican racism that are at the core of present-day white nationalism in the United States. This became clear as Trump installed white nationalists and military men as his closest advisors and cabinet appointees, and continued to hold rallies where he demonized Muslims and Mexicans. A new breed of white nationalists, self-identifying as alt-right and fed through online commercial operations like Breitbart News, began supporting insurgent Trumpist politicians to destabilize establishment Republicans. Since the issue of Confederate statuary received nationwide attention following the Charleston, South Carolina massacre by a self-proclaimed Confederate-loving fascist, members of the alt-right joined forces with neo-Nazis, lost cause Confederate fetishists, including the KKK, to storm the University of Virginia campus in support of maintaining the prominent monument to Robert E. Lee, the Confederate general of Confederate Virginia. In the opening gesture of their Unite the Right weekend rally, they marched to the Robert E. Lee monument bearing tiki torches, chanting, "You will not replace us. Jews will not replace us." And "One people, one nation, end immigration." Many giving the Nazi salute. University students, local anti-racist activists, and Black and white clergy who organized a huge presence to oppose the racist gathering were attacked by the intruders. And on Sunday, one of the self-identified fascists plowed his car at high speed into a group of locals demonstrating against the rally, killing 32-year-old Heather Heyer, a well-loved member of the Charleston community, the Charlottesville community. President Trump refused to hold the fascists accountable for the melee, injuries, and killing, saying both sides were to blame. That other side was Antifa. A strong anti-fascist movement developed in the late 1980s and 1990s to oppose the resurgence of racist intolerance and fascist violence. The movement was already 3 decades old when it sprang to oppose the aggressive spread of pro-fascist forces coinciding with the rise of Donald Trump. As suggested earlier, the rise and institutionalization of the Ronald Reagan political clique, first in California as governor from 1967 to 1975, and then as US president from 1981 to 1989, a major green light for the development of white supremacist groups, from marginal and obscure to mainstream. By the dawn of the 21st century, Reagan and his cronies and political descendants were masters of the device that came to be known as the dog whistle, using certain tropes and symbolic actions that telegraphed toxic white supremacy and anti-Black racism. As Reagan's free market economic and anti-union policies, accompanied by rapid deindustrialization and job shrinkage, produced homelessness and insecurity of the most vulnerable, they also increasingly affected white workers, privileged white workers, union workers in industry, making them easy prey to the white nationalist and politicized evangelical groups that had their own narrative about the causes. Big government, including mysterious Black helicopters, secularization, banks always implicating Jews, poverty programs always identified with African Americans, even though the majority of recipients were in fact white, and Mexican migrants and women taking their jobs, and increasingly abortion, especially white women getting abortions, and the fear of white genocide, which is their invented term. One example that broadcasts Reagan's racist agenda took place 3 months before the 1980 presidential election, when Reagan chose the significant date of August 3rd to give a campaign speech extolling states' rights near the town of Philadelphia, Mississippi, at the Neshoba County Fair in Neshoba County. There, on June 21st, 1964, 3 organizers for the Congress of Racial Equality, CORE, one being a local African American, the other 2 Northern Jewish young men, James Chaney, Andrew Goodman, and Michael Schwerner, had been abducted by the local Ku Klux Klan with the cooperation of the Neshoba County Sheriff's Office and the Philadelphia Police Department. Their bodies, riddled with bullets, were found buried in a dam near Philadelphia on August 3rd, 1964, 16 years to the day before Reagan's speech on states' rights, another trope for segregationists. Donald J. Trump Jr., campaigning for his father in the 2016 presidential campaign, also spoke at the Neshoba County Fair. Speaking to a crowd of 2,000, Trump Jr. drew large applause, it was reported, when he said he was an avid outdoorsman and competitive shooter and believed strongly in the Second Amendment. The crowd also waved flags at his speech, mostly United States flags, but at least one large rebel flag, and a "Don't Tread on Me" one. Trump Jr., before his speech, was asked about the controversy at the Democratic National Convention over taking the Mississippi flag down because of its rebel canton. He said, "I believe in tradition. I don't see a lot of the nonsense that's been created about that. I understand how some people feel, but there's nothing wrong with some tradition." Anti-Semitism was integral to anti-Black racism for the Klan and newer Christian terrorist groups, such as the Richard G. Butler's Aryan Nations, which in 1976 began referring to the federal government as ZOG, that is, Zionist-occupied government. These armed groups flourished and new ones sprouted, especially in the Pacific Northwest, where the Posse Comitatus group claimed in 1985 that our nation is now completely under the control of the international invisible government of world Jewry. The Reagan administration signaled a thumbs up to this movement 3 months into his second term in May 1985. On the 40th anniversary of the end of World War II, the president visited Bitburg Cemetery, where dozens of Nazi Waffen SS men were buried. Under the leadership of evangelical celebrities, preachers such as Pat Robertson, white evangelicals created a minor Christian crusade that lasted for most of the 1980s until the Sandinistas were voted out of power in 1989. They carried arms, weapons, and money. Evangelicals did, to Honduras for the Contras. The evangelicals delivered not only the humanitarian assistance and Bibles, but military surplus weapons provided by the US military. US mercenaries and missionaries crawled all over the borderlands of Honduras and Nicaragua and mobilized their congregates at home. Militarization of US culture was a rich setting for the organization of armed groups in the United States, loaded with conspiracy theories, a primary one being that liberals wanted to violate their sacred rights and confiscate their guns. Thank you.
Thank you, thank you, thank you. There we go. Thank you so much, Roxanne. That was incredible. A lot of that I've never heard much more than just headlines. So it was a really good overview for me. Thank you.
Thank you.
If anyone wants to unmute and say anything and do a little bit, you can. Seems like people are putting little notes in the chat for you, saying thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, we can do a little round of applause for Roxanne. Thank you so much, Roxanne. That was so
Thank you.
So thank you for that. I would now like to introduce to you Lesley Arimah, who was born in the UK and grew up in Nigeria and wherever else her father was stationed for work. She has been a finalist for a National Magazine Award and the Cain Prize, and is a winner of the African Commonwealth Short Story Prize and an O. Henry Award and other honors. Her work has appeared in the New Yorker, Harper's, Granta, and has received support from the Elizabeth George Foundation, the Jerome Foundation, and McDowell, among others. She was selected for the National Book Foundation's 5 Under 35, and her debut collection, What It Means When a Man Falls from the Sky, won the 2017 Kirkus Prize and the 2017 New York Public Young Lions Fiction Award. She lives in Minneapolis and is working on a novel about you.
Thank you, Sarah. And thank you everyone for coming for the reading. So I'm going to, one of the benefits of writing short stories is that they are short. And so I'm going to read a short story in its entirety and then read an excerpt from the beginning of a work in progress. So I will start with the short. Chuma. I lose things quite easily. Keys, textbooks, pay stubs. So when I misplaced my little brother, I thought nothing of it at first. I was home in Abuja for the first time in months, on break from university, a break I did not yet know would last years. Chuma had last called the day before, while I was laid over in New York, and we talked for hours as I wandered duty-free at JFK, touching bags I couldn't afford and annoying the store clerks who figured that out. Chuma was depressed, he said, and wondering what, if any, reason he had for going on. I gave the usual responses, his bright future, my unrelenting grief. I did not mention the prospect of hell, our parents' anguish, the stain on our community, and I could tell he appreciated those omissions. Yes, but you would get over it eventually. Chuma, please, you would ruin me. As the silence stretched, I fingered a set of headphones, almost dropping them when I saw the $40 price tag. It would have been $6 at any store in the country. These vultures, I said, hoping to distract him. Stop looking, you're always shopping. You won't find anything to buy if you don't look. That was Chuma, the most practical 16-year-old I knew. If he'd been prone to teen dramatics, my parents might have believed there was something wrong, but they just told him that people don't get depressed in Nigeria. It's all that winter and the abroad that makes Africans depressed. You can't get depressed in sunlight. Chuma had been a moody child, but those moods varied from silence to profound silence, so they thought nothing ill of what seemed to be their only well-behaved child. I didn't ask Chuma about his friends or his studies, again, trying not to sound like all the adults who glossed over his troubles. Instead, we turned the conversation to the last movie we'd both seen, Captain America, Civil War, and argued over Bucky, whom he adored and I thought a useless, troublemaking friend. You'll be all right, won't you, Chuma? I said in goodbye. You're coming and you love me best, so yes. After the call ended, I stared at my screensaver, the two of us the last time I was home. His face still had the boyish cheekiness of adolescence, and he topped me by almost half a foot, which wasn't saying much as I was very short, but still, my giant baby brother. I went back for the headphones, unable to resist buying something, anything, as attracted to spending money as I was to tall, dark, no-good Igbo men. This spendiness and my poor choices and boyfriends were the reasons my parents had halved, then quartered my allowance. So I spent my semesters at Huntington too broke and too far away from other Nigerians to get into trouble. Their neat management of my problems made it frustrating that I couldn't seem to see Chuma's. I found myself wishing often that he would make a scene to get their attention. The heat in Abuja was not as bad as I remembered, but I might just have been too tired to feel it. I spotted my mother's secretary, come driver, come figurative punching bag, and made for him, the baggage handler trailing me. Salim was effusive in his greeting as I was his favorite. He and my mother fought like sisters, saying mean things about each other in anger, but gossiping and giggling when they got along. So Salim, you haven't left us and taken a wife? Are you not my wife? When you marry me, I will marry. It was an old joke, and I was so relieved to be around someone who knew me, I wanted to cry. I tried to keep my eyes open as we journeyed to the estate, but even gossip could barely keep me up. Auntie Chioma had left her husband again. This time your mother did not let her come to stay in the house. She said, told her to go and stay in a hotel. The Girls' Alumni Association of my secondary school had disbanded after some scandal, almost to the day of the anniversary of the last 3 disbandments. They should team up with Auntie Chioma for a show. And what of Chuma? How is he? I'm sorry, I don't know this one. Who? I laughed sleepily. Salim and his jokes. I went straight to bed when I got home. My mother was out, but I could smell the work she had put Mariam to, the banga soup that was my favorite. It was one of the few things that would interrupt the 12-hour rest I insisted on. Chuma would likely jump on the bed when he got back from school. That too would wake me up. my makeshift alarm clock. My mother's voice pierced through my sleep. It was a high-pitched voice that carried, and in some other life, she could have been an opera singer. "Wake up, darling, come and greet me," she called from the entryway. My room was pitch black and I fumbled for the switch. Why hadn't Chuma woken me? The last conversation we'd had about him having no reason to go on tightened my chest. I made myself decent and rushed from my room, knocking into my mother. "Amaka, you're looking well. What's wrong?" "Good evening, Mommy, please, where is Chuma?" "Chuma? Which one is this? I know you haven't brought any of those boyfriends inside this house. I know you haven't." "No, my brother, Chuma, your son, remember him?" I knew I was pushing it with a sarcasm, but really, could no amount of good behavior erase my previous infractions? "You have started again with this brother thing. You grew out of it. Are things so bad in the States? Do you want to come back?" I ignored her and turned the corner towards Chuma's room. What had he done to piss her off so much that she would pretend she didn't know him? The last time he'd made her truly furious, he must have been 10 and told 2 of her then close friends and business partners what she whispered about them in private. I passed by his doorway, or where his doorway should have been, before I noticed that it was just a blank wall. I turned to my mother. "Seriously?" How like my parents, that after a lifetime of good behavior, they'd pretend Chuma never existed when he finally did some unforgivable wrong. The walling off of his room had my father's drama queen fingerprints all over it. "You can tell people outside what you want, but you must tell me the truth. What happened to my brother?" My mother's expression mellowed from annoyance to concern. She took my elbow gently. "Maka, you've never had a brother, you know that. We tried for years, you know that too. Please, don't be cruel in your anger. Sorry for sending you away." I tried hard to keep it together, but 3 days in, everyone still insisted the brother I knew I had didn't exist. Salim took to avoiding me. It was my father, returned from Lagos, who finally convinced me. He can't act for shit, giving away surprises and secrets with the overly affected air of a person incapable of true guile. My supposed fabrication confused and angered him so much that it finally sunk in. As far as they were concerned, Chuma had never existed. I spent half a day sitting by the wall that was once his door, scrolling through my phone for the emails and texts I sent to him, finding they had disappeared. My phone's screensaver had returned to its default, all photographic evidence gone. I clutched the overpriced airport headphones like a talisman. Chuma had been real when I bought them. When I heard my parents whispering about mental institutions abroad, I adjusted, feigning like I must have been going through some episode. I'm not sure what came over me, the stress, the heat. It was a hard sell. I may have been a bit of a problem child, but I'd never engaged in histrionics. They watched me closely for the next week, keeping my eager friends away with a word of some contagious American illness. Salim began speaking to me again. Mariam stopped crying, and my father made arrangements to return to Lagos in a couple of days. At no point during all this did I think I was crazy. I knew what I knew. I had a younger brother named Chuma. He was 16 years old. He hated the sliminess of okra soup. He loved superhero movies. He was practical and fun and funny when he wanted to be, and damn it, he was real. I'd been home for almost 3 weeks and everyone was getting back to normal. There was no talk of me going back to Huntington. My mother insisted on taking me with her on errands, get some sun, and I slumped in the back seat staring out the window. That's when I saw him. The man was tall, dark, and naked. One of those disturbed people you see every once in a while. He carried a bundle of grass on one shoulder and strolled along IBB Way, moving at a brisker pace than the stalled traffic. "Amaka, have some decency, Biko," my mother admonished. But I wasn't captured by his nakedness. I knew that face like I knew my own. Gone was the baby softness, replaced with the hard lines of adulthood. It was a face aged almost 20 years, but it was Chuma. Grown, alive, existing, naked, walking the streets like he hadn't a home. I opened the car door, forcing the driver to stop, and ignored my mother's screams. He was several yards ahead and turned, as if I had any doubt, turned when I called his name. I maneuvered the congestion of cars, slapping hoods that dared to nudge into me. Chuma scaled the concrete wall into some tall grass, disappearing. Try as I might, I couldn't pull myself over the wall, and my mother and Salim caught me when I tried to find another way around. They locked me in my room while they tried to figure out what to do with me. My only company was my phone, which dinged a few generic dings, concerned friends and nosy people who had heard about my little adventure. Then it dinged his ding, Chuma's ding. There was no number attached to the text that read, "Check your voicemail," but I obeyed. Nestled among messages left by secondary school girlfriends and old boyfriends was a voicemail that, like the message, had no identifying number. It was 3 minutes long. I pressed play. "My dearest Amaka, I saw you on the street the other day and wanted to stop, but it would have been awkward. I was only back for a little bit and didn't want to be disturbed, hence the outfit. I told you I would find a way, didn't I, to escape from it all? I am happy here, or at least not unbearably sad. We used to joke about how you can find anything in Nigeria if you have the money, and it's truer than we ever thought. I paid a man every kobo I've ever saved, every graduation dollar, every birthday pound, all my money, and some of yours too, sorry, and 3 fingers of blood, not mine, 3 fingers, like he was ordering whiskey, and now I'm here. Don't ask where here is. Don't look for me, dear sister. You will never see me again. I am only sorry that I could not erase your memory. The final ingredient was that one person, the person who loved me best in the world, must remember. Forgive me for devastating you. You both know you are the only one I can ask this." So that was the light-hearted portion of today's reading. The next bit is from an excerpt from a work in progress that is currently untitled, and so I will just go ahead and start reading. My mother was never one of those motherly types. From the moment I could eat solid food, she fed me her leftovers, resentful she had to feed me at all. And until I learned to cook for myself, my meals were decadent, if small affairs, for she enjoyed fine things. My clothing was miniatured from outfits she'd long abandoned so that I was always well turned out. She was good on paper in that way. My childhood friends were in awe of her and adored the soft perfumed hands she smoothed admiringly over their fresh cornrows and used to pinch their growing cheeks. "I've made a friend for you next door," she would say, after we moved to the next Lagos high-rise, the next well-appointed house in Asokoro, and I would make the dutiful trek to my new friend's home and out of her way. She never courted jealousy, too clever for that fleeting satisfaction, instead ingratiating herself to the neighborhood women, charming wives and treating their husbands with a pained courtesy that bordered on rudeness. Many a man laid down beside many a wife, muttering about her coldness, and the women murmured comfort and agreement, all the while swamped with a relief that made them amenable to taking me off my mother's hands. It helped that I was well-mannered and quiet, a good baby who had grown into a good girl. Mothers who were not my mother loved me. Their children, it could go either way. When I turned 13, my mother gave me a sex talk so detailed I could have opened a brothel. That, along with overheard bits of adult conversations, Ashewo, Ron's girl, harlot, tells me what she is. I don't know the word for the various uncles who have taken care of us, but I finally know why they do. And you might think I'd be resentful or angry or ashamed, but I am my mother's reluctant daughter, practical to my bones, and we both know that she's a difficult person to live with, Sweet to everyone but me and men, yes, even the uncles, because a clever, beautiful woman in a country like Nigeria will be given many reasons to rage, and these reasons will almost always be handed to her by men. Reasons that come to include a pregnancy she never wanted, and the laws that made it difficult and then impossible to get rid of, and parents left destitute after a war of men and their egos disguised as a bid for independence, and being sent to live with an uncle, like an uncle, blood relation and all, and having him examine her body in the same way every man she will ever work for will examine her body, and eventually try to sample it, sometimes successfully, sometimes not, but the outcome is the same either way. Whether she leaves or gets thrown out, she will have to start over, knowing exactly how it will end, and it gets harder. She gets harder until she is cutting as a diamond, and through a series of fortunate events I am never clear on, she discovers that because of her beauty or personality or a certain je ne sais whatever, there are men who will pay for the pleasure of being cut, figuratively, and she slices her way out of gropey office jobs to kedgy penthouses and refuses to let a daughter cramp her style. When I am 16, she asks if I remember Uncle Moby, Ni Jude and Moby Ejiofor, and I sort through my memories to the warmth of his friendly bearded face. He has asked to marry my mother and has secured visas for us to live with him in America. She is distracted as we pack, and for the first time in our lives, she's concerned about my needs in this place called LA, which I later find out is not Los Angeles, where I might run into Michael Jackson, but Louisiana, where I will never, ever run into Michael Jackson. At the airport, she steps out of line to take a phone call, leaving me with the envelope containing our papers in case I get to the front before she returns, in which case I am to go ahead and she will just have me page. It isn't until the second to last final call for our flight that I realize that she is not coming with me, has never planned on coming with me, that Judea Mobia Jerifor has been cheated off a wife. And I, my mother's practical daughter, come to understand why a woman who bargains living with her body sends her daughter away, whether the reason is to protect her child or rid herself of the competition. But it is not practicality that acquiesces me onto the first plane ride of my life, not practicality that buckles my seatbelt and pours over the safety card, not practicality that falters when I check the papers my mother shoved at me to see that Jude Amobi Ejiofor has not, in fact, been cheated of a wife. It is not practicality that believes this is just a ruse to get me to America, that my mother wouldn't do such a thing to me. It is not practicality that steals me to the border agent's persistent probing questions, not practicality that dies under Jude Amobi Ejiofor's persistent probing, under the constellation of light reflected in the sweat beads of his forehead. I am driven by hope that somewhere out there is a neutral state of being, a borderless territory where I am myself, not a daughter or wife or runs girl. Hope that across the Atlantic, far away from here, a woman will be handed fewer reasons to be angry. I cannot, but must, begin to tell you how wrong I was. Thank you.
Thank you so much. That was incredible. That was really, you really get the family dynamics, like all the different layers from all the different directions. Yeah, beautiful. Thank you. People are writing notes in the chat for you, saying thank you. All right, so from Lesley, we move on to Douglas. Douglas, I met last night. I got to sit in his class on the funny, so no pressure, Douglas. So a little bit about him. Douglas Kearney is a poet, performer, and librettist who has published 6 books that bridge thematic concerns such as politics, African-American culture, masks, the trickster figure, and contemporary music. Kearney's most recent work, Buck Studies, was awarded the CLMP Firecracker Award for Poetry, the Theodore Roethke Memorial Poetry Award, and the Silver Medal for the California Book Award in Poetry. Kearney's collection of writing on poetics and performativity, Mess and, was a small press distribution handpicked selection, and Pater examines miscarriage, infertility, and parenthood. He has received a Whiting Writers Award, was named a notable new American poet by the Poetry Society of America and has been awarded fellowships from Cave Canem and Rauschenberg Foundation. His work has appeared in Poetry, Iowa Review, Boston Review, and Indiana Review, and anthologies, including Resisting Arrest, Poems to Stretch the Sky, Best American Poetry, Best American Experimental Writing, and What I Say, Innovative Poetry by Black Poets in America. Raised in Altadena, California, he lives with his family a little west of Minneapolis, Minnesota, and teaches creative writing at the University of Minnesota, Twin Cities. Thank you very much, Douglas.
Thank you very much, Sarah. And thank you to VCFA. Thank you, Rita. Thank you all for being here. And thank you also to Roxanne and Lesley for the amazing readings. And for like completely changing my set list. I'm going to start with the thing that I plan to start with, though. It's a poem called Show. And show is a torsion. A torsion is a form invented by Indigo Weller. And it's kind of like a sestina, but imagine if a sestina decided to become a lace weaving pattern. That's what show is. A torsion. Some need some body, or more to ape sweat on some sight. Bloody pearl or dirty spit, hocked up for to show who gets eaten. Rig body up, bow to breeze a lazed jig, and sway to Grig's good fiddling. Pine deep dusk, a spot where stood body. Thus they clap when I mount bonk, jig up the lectern, bow to say it's all good. We gathered, withstood the bends of dives deeper, darker. They clap as I get down. Sweat highlights my body. How meats dyed bloody look fresher for showing. I got deep spit out my mouth. A rigid red rind. Bloody melon. Ha! No sweat. Joking. Nobody knows the trouble. Rig full of deos. Show. Why fix this mess? Spit in tragedy's good eye. This one's called Jigger Gogglers. Then bow housefully. They clap. Be misunderstood. Hang notes high or deep. Make my tongue a bow. What's the gift? My good songbox. The gift. Jiggle. Nickels from deep down my craw. They clap. I so jolly. Stood on that bank. Body picked over. Blood Rato. Braxton sweat brow syndrome. Spit out of sax bell. Rig a negrocious show of feels. For show. Sweat equals work. Bloody ink pot of body. I stay nib dipped. Show never run dry. Rigorously I spit out stressed feet. Lines jig. Ha 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 ha. Good one that I is. Bow deep but not out. Stood shining dim. They clap. Waves slapping hulls. Deep don't mean sunken. Goods not yummy, right? Bow blanched with foam. Jigs. This one's called They Clap. Barrow. So much deep ends upon dead. Stood I on that bloody rise of sweet body. There you is too. Sweat it lets. They clap, right? Some ask, post, spit, toe lipped. I said, show. So my next poem, oh wow, thank you. So my next poem, I'm reading this one, because of the excerpt that Lesley just read. And this poem is called First She Cuts the Stems. I wrote it for a dear friend and poet named Yona Harvey. Systems are the end of a rope, and the rope, measure and border between out, in. What's desires entwined there? Say, black woman cuts peaches down. A paring knife will do the trick. Orchard to house, a booming taxonomic doing. Systems are frictions that flim-flam as liquids. They abrade skin. In some systems, skins are tenor. Vehicles elsewhere. In, out, an abrasion lets. Low knocking at a door means a master, mister. Some doorways kind of clear. their throats from over. Bring them faster. Systems are what you're steady doing. Louvered shutters, let the light. A metonym for how outside, or inside in? Well, Christ, gal, it's hot as hell. Some windows kind of roll their eyes. Cut azaleas smell red as heat. Systems are will, squealing wood, hinge. Oil that gentle rattle. Slats a tremble means a breeze in. Say, a mister's room. Black wench! Clipped finches, shrill in brass lattice. A bowl of peaches set down fast as hurry up! The door swung clear. Said something cold. A passage out to a corridor. Then a kitchen. There's a pitcher. What sweats out itself, what was in it. Some kitchens kind of slit the skins. What was in them come undone. Systems are when the, say, black woman cut, a paring knife will do, then drop the stems entangled, jutting out the kitchen bin. Some houses kind of suck their teeth. The pitcher she pours in a cup. Fluid. Be so stupid! Finches, azaleas, rendered pets. Decor for those for whom some systems are maintained. Lazy, a paring knife will. And what are you doing? Calls of finches. The walls flinch. With that, red as the bowl full of peaches, pell-mell, while the breeze's cooling sweetness. So, one of the things I'm often trying to figure out is how to bring work that I consider like, that next shit, like the future. Like, how am I going to be innovative and all that? And especially, how am I going to be innovative and still legible? Because, it's very important that you not be so innovative that people don't understand how to buy your shit. So, in a way of thinking through this, I thought through the traditions that were available to me as a writer, and as something, and as a descendant of things that were at one point considered innovative objects that could be purchased. And so I began to think, what is it that Black culture has figured out as a means of introducing new stuff into the marketplace, which is kind of like our, hometown here in the United States of America. Nothing like going back home to Marketplace. Man, sometimes I remember Marketplace. Wow, the way they used to cook people. Oh, it was so delicious. Oh, the home cooking, the people cooking, the home boy and home girl and home folks. Man, the cooking they used to, do you remember that, the Marketplace? I used to love being in the Marketplace. Anyway, so this is kind of like a reunion feeling for me for just a minute. And I'm so happy to see so many of my neighbors from where I was born here in the United States of America. There's cattle, there's cotton. Oh my gosh, there's indigo and rum. It's so many things. But anyway, what I learned from the tradition was this, that all you need to do is frame the new thing as a brand new dance. And if you frame it as a brand new dance, people are totally ready for Black innovation. So I'm gonna do a couple of brand new dances. Maybe I'll do all three. This first one is called Do the Backseat Jam. Stop there, fam, and jump to the brand spanking. Back again, you know how it goes. Throw your hands in the air when the light's on. Maestro, raise the baton and swing till you feel it. The beat, what's taking over the street to the club. When I say, you say, ow, ow, it thumps. Let me see those hands. All the people in the Be Quiet. Get down on the floor like you know. This will be the short shot hit. Sweat through your clothes. You want it, you got it, you better put your hands. Get ready for the, you ain't ready for, you gonna listen up. Just as easy as falling off a countdown. 3, do it till it's done. To the 2, to the 1s in blue. Show them what you said to do. To 0s in brown. To the back, to the back. Now you're right in the jam. Do the cruise line up, slow grind up. Line up, everybody, for the rockin' and rollin'. You all in the groove from the windows to the walls. Hump that back, bend them knees, grind in tight on the one you're with it, down to the floor in this funky ass joint to dawn till dark. Fall next on deck, a new cut y'all ain't never heard, but the man on the wheel will make you move. The hot body, that hot body from coast to coast. Who got the most soul folk? Wanna hear y'all holler? Follow these steps. If you step, you best not too fast, now too far, not too low. Might catch the blues on the 1 and 3. Damn it, don't lose the rhythm. Gonna bring the beat back. Know how my crew and I do best believe gonna see y'all work it. Do the 6-foot jump down. Back with a dusty how we get it in, till the cut it loose like mama done it all the way live and direct you dead on it like pops hit the floor to that old gritty sound is spinning in the party. Get low, people in the groove, somebody scream the rhythm rock till the lights go dark. Can't feel the tempo, better lay it back. Easy when the horns blow, you know the time. Dig it when you gonna break down. Show them what you got, nobody's still standing up against the wall. Last call, all y'all, you peep. The beat fade to my peeps in black. Don't wave your hands at the drum, just crisscross, look alive. So for the next poem, I'm gonna read this one because of Roxanne. And this poem is called Manisology, and I'm gonna help you all win the next obscure, perhaps neologism type of competition that I know that we as writers oftentimes end up. And so this is Manisology, and Manus is the term for ghosts in Roman mythology, right? So ghosts, and so this ology then becomes the study of ghosts, and there's an epigraph to this, and it's after Charlottesville, but before it too. Shit, right? And the reason why I wrote this poem is because a friend of mine, like the day after Charlottesville, called, and I kind of knew what was happening because like you might not know this, but if you're not black, your black friends have like a special phone that when you call it because you want to ask your black friend to do something like racially healing, to sort of like Jemima up some rice, the rice of love and loving kindness, like that phone rings if you make that call. And so this friend called me to talk about the problem. And I decided not to talk about the problem. And this poem is about that process. Manisology. After Charlottesville, but before it too, shit. They called me, say, speak on the problem. They said I could do it from home, where children with books run in circles, bright riots of color and holler. Sure, I'd speak on the problem, since we do, as always been. Night of it, N and I misgave it as ours, making ruck in the rented house, nicked and dug at it that night. Thus us, as all the while reckoning us, as tearing at what's ours, until we sat, jostled, settled, just as how we supposed to, though what we then chose to was kiss a while. This looks like wounds when your whole skin is your mouth, as it must, because what's the problem is what we must do. We must stay doings for the problem. I said, I've been saying, like we must mule some pallid-ass hearts, our backs carts, or our blood a soap for shit that's their ashes made ours. Then be the brain their spectral mulling can murmur in like a house they call to beck. Speak on the problem. N said, that's why the nerves, the kind of what she say, is just what I'm saying is, after working that problem down to a faint rattle of chains, a vague keen in the walls, we fucked like a burning church. We were shut to it, bones ours, minds crackling with us was someone's problem, their tangled sheetfuls of tantrums. If I spoke from my home, would I say how we fucked? Drowning, knocking, and moaning, with moaning, knocking, phone ringing, like poltergeists wrecking a pantry, gnawing the fog of their tongues and their hangnails, so hungry for skin, for blood, dark skulls to hand. Always calling and calling, still ringing and ringing, we are tired and done, and hold all that we own. I answer the phone. I speak on. A problem. Night after what happened, the girl clambered into our bed for half the night after reading about ghosts. The boy, though, slept, a babe under blades, fan spinning back to where it started and back to where, and back to, and. And I'm just gonna end with a short one. So let's do, yeah, let's do Black Flight. Actually, you know what? I'm gonna do Promissory Note. Haven't done that one in a minute. Promissory Note. And this is about reparations. 1,863 minus 1,526 equals billions. Remitted in paper to ransom us napped, from families to captors. How much we want from each other, or is it for? Someone should pay for what someone shouldn't have paid for. Those doulos done to you know who done got pass gum checks, bum backs, and lumped sum. Cuffy Coffle's chock-a-block with cast of Star of Night. Still we call to see the bright side of whoever's newest mooning. Say, even if what bees lacked is not sense, is it not a black fist, a handout made blunt? Thank y'all.
Thank you so much, Douglas. That was amazing. Really, the range in your emotions and how you switch back and forth with the different voices is phenomenal. Yeah. I think, there's only a few people saying things in the chat. So yeah, thank you, Douglas. Really appreciate it. Really nice to meet you. Next up, we have someone I sort of know, Mr. Sean Prentiss. We met through the MFA WP program in 2017, and it's a real pleasure to introduce you, Sean. So Sean Prentiss is the author of Finding Abbey, A Search for Edward Abbey and His Hidden Desert Grave, which won the 2015 National Outdoor Book Award for History Biography, the Utah Book Award for Nonfiction, and the New Mexico-Arizona Book Award for Biography. Prentiss is the series editor for the Bloomsbury Publishing Writers Guide series. He is also the co-editor of The Far Edges of the Fourth Genre, Explorations in Creative Nonfiction, published by Michigan State University Press, a creative nonfiction craft anthology. And he is the co-editor of the forthcoming book, The Science of Story, The Brain Behind Creative Nonfiction by Bloomsbury Press. So please, a warm welcome, and thank you so much, Sean.
Sarah, thanks so much. It's great to be introduced by you. And first off, thanks to Roxanne, Lesley, and Douglas. You set the bar really high, and I really appreciate it hearing your words. Thanks so much. And then to all my friends out there from New Mexico to Pennsylvania to South Dakota to Michigan to next door. It is great seeing everyone there. And also, this is maybe the first reading I've ever been a part of where we're ahead of schedule by quite a bit. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to read my entire book. And that should set us back maybe 45, 50 minutes. So get comfortable, no fidgeting. I don't know if you noticed I fidget the entire time, and I'm so sorry about that. But what I'm going to try to do now is, and the final thing I'll say, Douglas, I just tried to teach a single lesson on being funny, and I did a pathetic job. So I need to bring you into my class next time to teach me how to be funny. But those were wonderful stories and poems from both Lesley and Douglas. So what I am going to do now is ignore the chatter box down at the bottom, and I'm going to try to share my screen. Sarah, your job is, if I screw this up, if it doesn't work, let me know, and I'm going to bail. But I'm going to try to do a PowerPoint with my poetry reading, because those two things always go together. So now... Sarah, does that work? Are you just seeing my regular slide?
So you had it for a second and then you just switched it back to now we see both the presenter side. Lesley knows how, right?
Is this better now?
That's perfect.
Yep.
All righty. All right. So now I am ready to get going. All right. So I'm going to read some poems while telling the story of my time working for a youth corps in the Pacific Northwest, where me and a whole bunch of 16 to 21-year-olds built trails for one season, though I did it for many seasons. So you'll get some stories, some images, and some poems to go along. But this is a story about working for the Northwest Youth Corps. But before I did that, I went to a small school out in Colorado, and I was a ski bum, and I graduated. and I had no idea what to do. So I joined the Peace Corps, and I did some work down in the Blue and John Crow Mountains in the east coast of Jamaica. And when I came home, I got a flyer in the mail from the Peace Corps, and it offered some jobs. And one of them was about working for a trail crew. And I needed to get out of the city and back into the woods. My life right then was just really bumming around and not going in any serious direction. So by 26, I've lived in 2 countries and 3 states, in an apartment, a cabin, a shed, and a car, running and running. The city where my lover lives is an assemblage of noise, a factory of waste, the racket of rush hour, noosing a knot within my chest. I'm tired of temp work, washing dishes, answering the phone. Santa Fe Community College, how may I direct your call? Northwest Youth Corps claims I'll get 150 tent nights. I've never handled a trail tool. I've only backpacked once. I accept the moment the job is offered. So then, after buying a whole bunch of gear, logger boots, hickory shirts, work pants, I kissed my girlfriend goodbye, and I flew out to Portland. I slept in the airport, took a bus down to Eugene, Oregon, and then hitched a ride to the Northwest Youth Corps headquarters, having no idea what I was getting myself into. And so they take us to training, and we go to training at Silver Lake State Park, Oregon, for a week of training. And it is spring. And these April nights, shivering inside white wall tents, we echo the trail terms Wood Boss teaches us: angle of repose, rock bar, check dam. These terms become hymns we sing during this week-long coastal mountain training, learning to dig forest into trails, water bar, hinge, turnpike. We future Northwest Youth Corps leaders quiz each other over what these terms mean in the forest of our lives. Hazel hoe, hog hoe, cut bank. Woods Boss preaches, so our trail crew. Woods Boss preaches, so it is our trail crew gospel. Woods Boss preaches, so we preach back. Pulaski, McLeod, pick ads. During sleep, hands instinctively curl as if still clutching trail tools. We dream mumble their names. And then after training, which went on for about 8 days, then we head to Eugene and Northwest Youth Corps headquarters. And there you stumble upon 40 youth. And these youth are all sorts of humans. They're anyone from honor students who want to get more experience living and working in the woods, to people sent there for pretty violent crimes. I've worked with attempted, or people accessory to murder, and people who have shot other people. And then your boss gives you 6 to 10 people, and they become your crew, your family, for the next 6 to 10 weeks. And then what you do is you travel around the Pacific Northwest, going spot to spot, and working in various wilderness areas and national parks and state parks. And each week or 2 or 3, we move to some new project, until we are embraced our first 3 weeks by 19,000 acres of andesite and basalt monoliths, phoenixing from the western slope of the southern Cascades. Up a convolution of logging roads we drive till we terminate at a sign that reads, Boulder Creek Wilderness. Here we nest. And when we were in the woods and the wilderness, some days were so beautiful, and I'd ask you right now to close your eyes a moment, and then open them to that babbling creek. What is its name? Maybe Boulder Creek, or Rattlesnake, or some other name so beautiful you long to hold it in your mouth. Run your tongue across the sound. Hush its name back into the full moon breeze. Let the creek course its way towards the North Umpqua River. This moment I learned life is too big to hold. It's only something to be tasted, a savoring. And we would stay in the woods almost the entire time. You'd sometimes have a weekend to go into town. You take a quick shower, wash what little clothes you have, and then put everything back on. You normally have maybe 2 sets of work clothes and 1 set of weekend clothes. But you were in the woods for so long that the other world felt so far away, so unimportant. And week by week, we grow towards a condensed language. Words disremembered, abandoned from tents and saw packs. What use for the word sink When might we utter closet or phone or bank account? These words, as unneeded as a third sum, unneeded as money or credit card girlfriend, becomes little more than a weekend dream after 4 weeks of woods living. I give you TV. I give you movie theater and radio. Do you want more words that these backwoods winds strip away? Take traffic jam, take fuel pump, take 9 to 5. God, take commuting, take Howard Stern, take pavement, take concrete. Take, we beg of you, microwave and power lines. Take nightly news. We give each and every one away because these industrial words taint our wild new memories. But living in the woods, is wonderful, and it was one of the best experiences of my life. But when you never come out, there's so many things you cannot do. You can never get your mail. You can never see friends. So living in one world means giving up another. And remember when I told you this crew and I, how it's remembered so many words, how we gave those words: cable TV, desks, VCR, cable, coffee maker, back to society, begged you to dispose of them, just broken sound, glass in the mouth. Forget all that. For now, think of 2 months living in a tent, week on spike without showers or shaving, days without changing hickory shirts or boxers, clothes faded to rags, stained of earth. Everything is conceived from rock and dirt anyway. I need to talk about an aching. Another crew leader, Ethan, and I spent a night in Hood River. Tonight we are human and in love with our women thousands of miles away. We also need something stronger than iodine-treated water, so we splunk into a midday bar. But I'm meandering. I find a payphone, slide quarters into its hard belly. Catherine's everything I'm not. Pulsating lights, dance club, Marlboro lights, burn to the butt, hands of clay. Her voice huddled in a megapolis of subway lines and tunnels. Why is it so easy to talk to you, not her? She fusses across phone lines about kissing lips, not mine. I sever our line and stumble, not yet drunk, toward our bar. This June night, Ethan teaches me the last lessons of drinking to excess, waking in some $40 motel to an alcohol fog. There was once possibility. Come hazed morning, no one loves me except the perfect balance of the Pulaski. I have no home except that echoing tent, that sleeping bag that no matter how tightly it sheaths this body, never feels like arms, like thin lips. This exact moment, I commit only to crew, to trails. And then we would spend all season working, spring, summer, fall, whatever the season was. And then the days start counting down. The trails start getting complete. The project's getting racked up. And then pretty soon you're dirty like me here. Back when I had hair and a beard and hadn't taken a shower in a few days. But you're also a family, and leaving the trails, leaving the woods starts worrying you. So we're to our last days and the last moments. And after months of constructing trails, digging society from our bones, this crew has transformed into Enkidu before he loved Shamhat, when he spoke the language of those who ate grass and drank from water holes. At our end, I fear Enkidu's spirit deserts us. Each of us soon exiled as Enkidu was. Too soon we return to the rule of ruining cities, no longer home beside bear and elk, no longer drinking from crystalline creeks. And then the trail season ends, and then a decade later, I went to a artist in residence outside of Mancos, Colorado, in the Plata Mountains, and it was at the Aspen Guard Station, a beautiful CCC cabin in the woods. And my now wife Sarah and I went there, and I worked on Finding Abby, revising it. And almost as soon as I got there, Sarah kept telling me that I shouldn't just revise, but I should write something new as an artist residency, and I should be creating, not just trying to finalize the book. But I didn't know what to write. My brain was really focused on Finding Abby, and I couldn't think of what I should do. So we just would go for hikes. And the amazing thing about this residency was it was literally a mile or two from some of the trails I'd built. And Sarah and I would take these long walks on all the trails I'd constructed, and I'd tell her all the different stories of all the characters I just read to you. And I realized that that's what I needed to start with. I needed to write the stories of those trail crew members. And that's what Crosscut is. But the beginning of the book and the end of the book don't begin on the trails. Instead, they begin 10 years later, right around the time of the artisan residency. And I was living far from the city. I was living in the city, far from the mountains and the trails. And I felt completely without home. The memories of that trail life haunt me. And when it's lonely here in Grand Rapids, and those wildernesses seem so much further than beyond the 100th meridian, I pace the confines of this house until I end up in my living room closet, flipping through 12-year-old photo albums. I almost need earthen images into Duffy Peninsula soil or St. Helens ash dirt. Leaning closer towards these snapshots, I feel wet winds sloughing off. Instead of closet walls, a blanket of Devil's Club. Instead of hardwood floors, towering false cedars. Fingers on photos, I realized that if I'd Pulaski'd this world, there would be no straight shot highways, no 9-to-5s, no subdivisions, assembly lined into the broken images of Abraham Levitt's and son. I set down photos and stumble into this nightfall of mortgaged houses, bury face into this yard's only tree, then low into the dirt's reek. Thanks so much, everyone.
Thank you. That was amazing. Really was. And I love the combination. Like, I really like that, how you gave us the visuals and the poems and seeing you at the same time, talking and remembering, and how you seamlessly flowed in and out. Not bad, not bad.
Yeah,
Thanks, Sarah.
If everyone would like to unmute, let's give all of our writers a round of applause, and then I'll let Sarah lead the Q&A.
Yay.
Thank you for
Thank you, everybody. So let's do we have a little time. So if anyone wants to pop in questions into the chat, or Rita, do you want to start us off?
Sure. I was thinking, Douglas, I've heard recordings of show before, and it's always so powerful, and it's always catches me by surprise. And when I hear that poem, it reminds me of one of my favorite poets, Marlene Norby's Phillip, in the sense that she has that polyphonic voice going on. And I know a lot of people asked about the different voices in your poems, like, how do you maintain the balance? They provide such powerful, original, and kind of devastating commentary. It shocks you out of the lyricism in a really important way. So I was just wondering, as you're writing, like, what is that process like?
Am I okay? Good. I mean, I think a lot of it comes from listening to sort of audio collages that are a part of like traditions of hip hop, and like sometimes even when it's not through sampling, you'll hear just a bunch of different people in the room, and sometimes they're shouting, and they're just kind of getting into that space. And so for me, it comes from it, I'm much more interested in not being the only person in the room of the poem. There are some poems that feel very much like what we would usually think of as like a lyric poem, so sort of single perspective. But I'm oftentimes attracted to how having a kind of group of people allows you to sort of fractally engage a question or a problem or a concern. And so that balance is it's usually harder for me to find to have a party with two people than it is for me to have a party with like 6 or 7. so yeah, I have some poems that I could show, some newer poems, where I feel like that kind of spread of voice is so saturating that there are poems that I actually wouldn't read aloud. Like I wouldn't read them aloud because of that. And that at that point, I think they're just much more ready and available to be looked at and then sort of staged in the reader's mind or read by a group of people which I found has happened at times. And so that's really exciting to me.
Thank you. I had a question sort of similar. It was about the musicality, because the three of you have such different musicality to each of your pieces, yet there's that rhythm, that internal cadence. And so I was wondering how, like, if when you're writing or in the editing and kind of reworking your pieces, do you then speak them aloud and you feel them in your body, like standing up and work them and listen to them? Short stories as well as poetry, as well as spoken word, more performative poetry. I'm just wondering what the connection is between your physical being and how you read it, and how if that affects when you go back and edit and revise. Sean, you can answer that one.
I was wondering if we were going to have a staring contest to see who would hit the unmute button first. But for me, yeah, definitely. I'll write a rough draft and I won't read it aloud for a while. But before I consider any piece done, I've got to read it, whether it's a chapter or a poem. And I hope it has some musicality to it, some flow. And that's probably the last thing I always do.
Lesley, do you find you do that too?
I think for me, it is part of the writing process. I feel like a lot of us write with an internal rhythm, and oftentimes it's when after we've written it and when we're reading it out loud. Usually, for me, that's usually pretty close to the last step, where you feel what that you sort of get a more concrete sense of what that rhythm is. And if it's like this is probably more common with poets, but for me, if there's a sort of a very strong sort of like metronome, then it's especially in usually in isolated paragraphs, I will go back and edit the language to sort of further fit this rhythm that I did not consciously know that I was sort of playing to at the time of drafting the piece.
Perfect. Thank you. Thank you very much. Do we have any questions? Not really. Do you have any questions for each other, my writer friends?
I have a question for you guys. I'm just gonna talk if no one else is. This is my version. So I was thinking, as poets, as fiction writers, nonfiction writers, this idea of vulnerability is so key to producing kind of work that has a really strong connection with the audience. And how do you find yourself exploring that space? Because it can be really difficult, right? And linked to vulnerability is this idea of psychology. And even I'm haunted by Lesley's story that she opened with, this kind of dual register of psychology, where you get the insider outsider point of view almost running simultaneously, right? And it causes a lot of discordance, I think, in the audience's mind, but it makes the piece even more haunting. So how do you access vulnerability that feels open and psychology that feels authentic on the page? Big question.
Yeah, that's a somewhat complicated question. In my case, I find that it is easier for me to access if I feel personally distant from what I am writing, in the sense that it's sort of one of the reasons why I don't write a lot of sort of like closely autobiographical fiction, while still sort of this balance of like not writing autobiographical fiction while also mining my own interiority. And there's sort of for me, and it's a different process for many writers. For many writers, that the way that they access that is by writing, closely autobiographical fiction that allows them to sort of access their own internal lives. But I like to sort of like draw a line, and that's just personal for me. I find it sort of like easier to sort of go to be vulnerable on the page if there's not a direct line pointing towards Lesley. Like if there's not a direct line, then it's easier for me to sort of access that. And so I don't write. So for me, it's part of not writing autobiographical fiction, or if it is autobiographical, I've shielded it so much that it's unrecognizable from myself.
Yeah, that's a great answer, Lesley. I mean, like, for me, the vulnerability is, by the time I write a lot more than I publish. There's the first person who I'm writing for, so to speak, is myself, and that's not to. Hopefully, that doesn't make it sound like I'm trying to be indulgent. It's more the idea of like, I write to help myself understand things that are sometimes complicated for me to understand. And so there's always this process of a kind of an analysis that's happening when it's something vulnerable. To me, once I put something on a piece of paper, I can't deny having thought that or having felt that or having expressed it. And so that becomes like an important sort of way of like keeping an account of things that I felt, things that I've thought. A very particular example is in the book Patter, which, as Sarah said earlier, is about miscarriage, infertility, and finally parenthood. I had written quite a few poems about like grappling with the question of with the miscarriage, and toward the end of the book, of finishing the book, I was leafing through some old journals, because I had felt like I had calibrated the distance inappropriately, like I was being super craft oriented, and not crafty in the sense of like shrewd, but more just sort of like, I want when people read this to know that I know what the hell I'm doing with a poem. And so that kind of started getting in the way of the work. And I found this phrase that was a very damning phrase that I'd written in my journal at one point, which was, "I love your body, I hate it." And that was a very damning thing to have written. But when I saw it, I realized that was the core question, one of the core problems that the book was that all these poems and years had been trying to grapple with. And so that phrase became like the core of 4 poems throughout the book. And each one of those poems is trying to work out what that means. Like, what does it mean? And being very available with the process. Some of them were moving towards rationalization, but then they would kind of bite back at the idea of rationalization. Like, if you rationalize your way out of this, then you're being dishonest. And so that sort of what I would call a performance of vulnerability and analysis is something that a lot of my poems do if they are going to be about something personal. And that performance isn't false. It's just being externalized and made available.
Yeah, the one thing I'll touch upon that I really love that Douglas said was that the first person that he writes for is himself. And I think that helps when your audience is just you. You can always not publish it, always delete it if it doesn't work, if it's too vulnerable. But for me, I've got to start with the stories I care about, the things that affect me. And then just like Douglas, I write for myself first to understand my world. But then it's just closeness, whether it's about ourselves or not, we've got to bring the reader close to the story. So, yeah.
Yep. Thank you. We have a question from Nina saying, saying, possibly weird question, but how many drafts and rewrites do you typically go through before you feel you've finally gotten it right? She's been thinking a lot about this recently for the thesis process. Does anyone have any advice or thoughts?
Just two.
2 thoughts or two rewrites?
2 rewrites. No, I'm just kidding. I'm completely kidding. Anywhere from 5 to 50. I mean, it's the more complicated, the longer it goes for me. So it's many, 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 especially if I really love the piece and want to get it right. I have an essay that I thought about sharing tonight, and it's probably literally 10 years old, and I probably revised it over 100 times, and I'm not sure if it's where I want it to be. And I suspect that it'll never, ever get published because I don't think I'll finish it. And the final thing I'll say, since Nina, you brought up that question, it's great to see all the VCFA students here from the very first year till this very last year. And now I'm going to shut up.
Thank you.
Each piece goes through its own process. I've had sort of the sort of happy experience of having a piece essentially come out done. And that's I really wish I would have them more often, but so that would be considered just like one draft, and then just maybe did a little bit of tweaking here and there. But then there are other pieces that have just sort of been put through the ringer time and time again. I'm currently working on a novel that I'm not entirely sure which draft I'm in, but at one point, after sort of doing a couple of revisions, I came to the realization that the reason that the novel was not working was that the story was being told from the wrong character's perspective. And so, every single one of those revisions that I did on what was then the current draft, like it was it felt like a waste of time, but those were all revisions I had to do to get to the point to realize that it was from the wrong character's perspective. So there's no sort of set answer for what that looks like. I will say that one of the sort of incorrect versions of the revision process was my thesis. So don't worry about it so much for getting it perfect for your thesis. Like, get your thesis done. Like, that might not be the book. It might just be the thesis. So,
Yeah. A couple of things come to mind after what you just said, Lesley, that I think is that just was wild. That if the wrong character is the voice of the novel, and yet we think of the possibility that every character in the novel could have a voice. It's like, what then? Like, for that character, would this story be a song cycle? Would it be like like how would that character say their part of that story? That just that broke me open really in a really cool way. Yeah, I tell my students all the time that the first draft's only job is to not be the final draft, and that the people who get in the way of that is usually us. We kind of demand it. And I think that being on the schedule of an MFA doesn't help alleviate that sense of like every moment has to be like, I have to be moving forward, I have to be moving forward, I have to be moving forward. So another thing I really appreciate about what Lesley said was the idea that you're not wasting time when you're writing a draft that doesn't end up being the one that you want it to be. And I'm also really grateful to Sean for talking about, sometimes you'll work on something for 10 years and at some point you ask yourself the question, am I even working on this to be published? You're working on it for this other thing, this other purpose, which is, just understanding something that's complicated and putting it down. And it's easy to, a person could say it's very easy for a poet to say this because, you can just be like, done. But what I always say is like, in a 60-page book, poets have to come up with 60 ideas. So, there's that. But the other thing I would say is to echo something that I think has been the spirit of this, that your thesis can be just a documentation of what you've been doing these years in your MFA. It doesn't have to be your first book. It doesn't have to be, or if you've published, it doesn't have to be your next book. And the last thing I'll say, I'm sorry, the last thing I'll say is like Sly Stone, from Sly and the Family Stone, was notoriously late to concerts all the time. And there were lots of reasons for this. Many of this involved like Disco Sugar, but but one thing he said that I think is really important is like, sometimes you don't feel your soul at 7:30. Your MFA program's length has not been meticulously calibrated as the ideal amount of time it takes anybody to have a writing breakthrough through what they've been working on their entire lives. That doesn't make it a bad thing, but you start your MFA and if you go like, this is a 3-year program, that means in 3 years, I'm going to figure out why I don't think my father loves me. Like, that's it. Like, like I got it. This is perfect. And it'll be on a semester system. Why go to therapy when you could just go to an MFA, right? That's what people should do. So don't impose that pressure on yourself, because it's not a realistic pressure, but instead use that time to make discoveries in an environment where you will be sort of supported and pressed to discover. It's less, I think, like you have to turn something in, sure, but it doesn't have to be the first book. Thank you, Sarah.
Thank you. That was great. And it kind of leads into, because you're talking about like the process and the working on things. And so my last question before we close out tonight was, I know that you're probably all got multiple projects going on, but what's the thing that you're doing right now creatively that you're most passionate about and most like obsessed with? Sean, you look obsessed.
I've got a few different answers. The first one that came to my mind, and she just signed off and went to bed, but it's teaching my daughter to ski. You know, what could be more beautiful than seeing someone else learn a new art and watching her love it. So, you know, that's nothing to do with writing, but it's creativity.
Mm-hmm.
The next is, I'm really just dabbling right now, but I'm writing a lot of daughter poems. So I'm spending a lot of time on poems about her. But I really want to get back to a variety of other projects. But, you know, what something Douglas said is going to inform my answer here. And one of the things I'm really, really trying to work on hard is the MFA, and then trying to get a job, and then trying to get known on any level made me into a really manic writer / publisher. And I was so worried about publishing. So really the thing I'm most excited about now is trying to publish as little as possible and write as much as possible, and just write for myself, go back to that single audience and not even think about there being someone on the other side of the screen. Because I got into this game because I need words on the page, and I want to return to that innocence where it's for me, and at some point I'll share it, but I don't want to write for any other known audience for a little while to recalibrate myself. And that's nothing about the publishing game. It's nothing about the outer world. It's about who I am and where I am and what I want. And I'm really lucky to be there. So I'm really excited to just play and do nothing more.
Good for you.
Yeah, I'll go next. You know, I always got some projects to write, working on this lecture series. Got a couple of manuscripts I'm trying to finish up, some essays. But I think the thing that I'm most excited about is learning how to use this as a compositional tool. This is Ableton Push, and I think it's the way to kind of deal with the question of multiple voices and collage in a lot of the poems. So it's just something I want to learn how to use in the next year or so.
I'm sorry, what is that?
Is that? Yeah.
This is a drum machine essentially. It's called Ableton Push, and so you can use it to compose musical software, and you can program sounds to each one of these pads and play it. And that would help deal with poems like this. You know, like so this is one of the poems I was talking about that like I'm not gonna read this aloud. Like I don't want to, and and that's like against the whole idea. But I imagine I could play something adjacent to it with this.
I have to say it. Fuck yeah. That would be amazing. I mean, that would be good. I love this. I had no idea. This is incredible. Yeah, if it was like listening to like a complementary sound and words and voices. Sweet. Sweet. Okay.
So, I will, sort of as a sort of nod to the current moment that we're in. I have been finding it very hard to be, sort of passionate about anything except for, surviving and making it going from day to day. My novel has been sort of like the sort of the project that has absorbed much of my attention, but that is not saying much as there have been so many other things that have been taking up sort of like the bandwidth of my attention. One thing I will say that's sort of adjacent to what Sean has said is that I sort of encourage you to treasure this sort of creative space that you're in right now. Before, I wrote my short story collection in obscurity, and I would relish the chance to write my novel in obscurity because it is, especially because there are so many things that are going on, it has sort of become, it's getting a lot better now, a challenge to sort of filter out a lot of voices, and not just, and when I say filtering out voices, like not like external voices, just the idea that, oh, there is, sort of like an editor waiting, looking over my shoulder, waiting for this thing. I think that that is not something that I find useful or necessary to my own creative process. So don't worry about have a professional goal that that includes, of course, being published and having this writing career that you want, but make like that whatever your professional goal is completely separate from your creative goal, and your creative goal is, and your creative space is something that you like sort of like need to build a wall around. And so, like, this does not answer the question at all, but is just sort of the first thing that came to mind, as somebody who is like passionate about my book, but also sort of having like life intrude in so many ways. And so I don't know what this sort of past year has done for everyone in terms of sort of creative process, the passions, getting work done, but whatever it takes to build an impenetrable wall around your creative life is what you need to do. So I'll just leave it at that.
Thank you. I think that's a perfect way to end with that concept. So if you don't like to unmute yourselves, and you can say whatever, but thank you all so much. I really appreciate the reading tonight. I really appreciate your time and your energy and everything you read to us. So thank you very much.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you so much. Yeah, feel free to unmute and we can do a round of applause. And you guys can talk and so on. Our next reading will be on April 16th, and it'll be featuring Ruben Quesada, Megan Fernandez, Ken Chen, Yumna Chawla, and Erica T. Worth. So please come to that. It'll be at 5:30 on April 16th, and all of our writers are welcome to come as well. So one more round of applause, and thank you so much to all of our writers tonight.
Thank you, everybody.
Thanks, Douglas.